the affluent township of Colts Neck, where peaceful streets and sprawling estates stood as symbols of success and family pride. The Caneiro family's mansion seemed no different from any other, a place of warmth, security, and generational legacy. Yet, on the night of November 20th, 2018, everything changed in a way that would shake the community to its core. Oti, approximately 5:00, las 0 de la mañana. First responders were dispatched to a fire after neighbors reported smoke and flames rising from the roof. Upon arriving firefighters realized this was not a routine house fire, but a catastrophic scene where a tragedy had already occurred. The bodies of Keith, Jennifer, and their 2 children were discovered inside, victims of an unimaginably brutal act. As investigators began their painstaking work, combing through debris and wreckage, a grim reality emerged. This was no accident. This was an orchestrated act of violence, bearing signs of homicidal intent followed by a calculated attempt to cover it up with arson. Here, in what should have been a sanctuary of safety, 4 lives had been extinguished in a chilling manner. Early clues pointed to an intricate crime scene, signs of forced entry, blood evidence, and alarms that had been silenced. The Caneiro family was well liked and respected, with no history of threats or disputes that could easily explain such violence. Investigators turned to a disturbing possibility. The perpetrator was not an outsider, but someone familiar with the family's routines, someone who would understand the mansion's layout and the psychological impact of destroying a home meant to be a fortress. As the sun rose over the smoldering remains, what began as a fire call had transformed into a high-stakes homicide investigation. As forensic teams worked around burnt beams, the question on everyone's mind was not just who did this, but why. Detectives found critical evidence, pivoting suspicion toward Paul Caneiro, the older brother of victim Keith Caneiro. Though Paul shared blood with his victims, what investigators uncovered suggested a meticulously planned execution. Evidence included blood-stained clothing in Paul's basement and a bullet-matching ammunition linked to the crime scene. Surveillance footage showed his vehicle in proximity to the Caneiro estate on the morning of the murders. Paul told police he was out of town, a claim that, when confronted with independent verification, quickly unraveled. Earlier that morning, a separate fire was started at Paul's residence, suspected to be a diversion intended to mislead investigators. The level of orchestration suggested a calculated attempt to confuse and manipulate the early stages of the investigation. Forensic profiling indicated this was far from random. It was a staged distraction, a psychological tactic meant to buy time. A portrait began to form as someone entangled in a web of financial stress and disputes over joint family enterprises. Financial tension, investigators theorized, culminated in what prosecutors would later describe as a premeditated act of family annihilation. What started as an unthinkable tragedy transformed into a dark story of betrayal and an unfathomable break between brothers. The narrative would grip the nation with questions of the terrifying extent to which human behavior can be pushed. Everything was on the line. As the Bergen County investigation evolved into a full-scale murder inquiry, detectives began compiling a mountain of evidence. Prosecutors would later describe this evidence in court as both compelling and damning, beyond forensic links tying Paul Caneiro to the scene, including blood on clothing hidden in his basement and ballistic matches to ammunition. There were other dimensions that suggested motive, opportunity, and intent. Among these was the financial context of the brothers' relationship. Keith and Paul had been involved in shared business ventures and family investments in the months before the murders. Relationships turned tense as questions arose about missing funds and decision-making authority. Prosecutors argued Paul faced the possibility of losing access to significant financial resources, which could have devastated his reputation and sense of identity. This financial strain created a motive deeply intertwined with fear, resentment, and desperation. Prosecutors also pointed to a massive $1.5 million life insurance policy on Keith's life. The policy was structured in a way that would only pay out in the event that the entire family perished. While defense attorneys argued this was insufficient to prove motive, the prosecution viewed it alongside surveillance evidence and the suspicious diversionary fire. As investigators interviewed neighbors and business partners, a picture of escalating tension emerged. These accounts suggested the murders were not spontaneous, but the tragic culmination of long-standing disputes and a breakdown of familial bonds. Forensic accountants worked to trace every financial transaction that could provide insight into motive, timing, and incentive. Prosecutors presented a case that Paul had a concrete, personal investment in altering his trajectory, a motor rooted in fear of loss. The jury was faced with a narrative of the psychological unraveling of a relationship and the collision of money and identity. As the trial of Paul Caneiro commenced in 2026, the courtroom became the stage for a story of unimaginable family betrayal. The prosecution meticulously laid out physical evidence, including ballistic matches and surveillance footage showing his movements. The human drama unfolded, revealing a man who had allegedly planned the murder of his brother, sister-in-law, and 2 children. The defense countered with arguments emphasizing the lack of direct eyewitnesses and potential alternative explanations. Yet, the jury was confronted with a mountain of corroborated evidence that painted a picture of premeditation and opportunity. When the jury delivered its verdict guilty on all counts, including 4 counts of first-degree murder, justice settled over the case. The trial became a cautionary tale about how money, jealousy, and desperation can converge to create unspeakable tragedy. The legacy of the Caneiro murders endures as a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers are not strangers, but those we know intimately. Remember, subscribe, Criminal vs. Where every crime hides a story.